I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. My guest for this episode is Mark BOWLES. Mark is an inventor, a serial entrepreneur, and a technology investor and venture capitalist. As you'll hear in our conversation, Mark's been involved with a number of different technology startups, but the company that you're most likely to know of is, not surprisingly, his biggest success. Mark was one of the inventors and the founders behind the company EcoATM. If you've ever been in a Kroger or a Safeway or an Albertsons or a Food Lion, just about anywhere in the country, you'll have seen the EcoATM kiosk, big green kiosk right next to the Coinstar machine. EcoATM was the first company to make recycling your mobile phone easy and profitable. You take your old phone to the kiosk, you plug it in, the machine runs some diagnostic tests, confirms its functionality, checks to see whether the screen is broken. A consumer rep, an actual human being in California, confirms your identity and that the phone is not stolen, and bang, you receive a valuation and a payment right there on the spot. EcoATM, in return, recycles the phone's parts, keeps it from ending up in the landfill. Win-win for everyone. The story of EcoATM, and maybe more importantly, the successes and failures that led up to Mark and his partners founding EcoATM, is only part of our conversation. The other part is what Mark has been involved with since he sold EcoATM, and how that success has made his other endeavors possible. If you've ever wondered how the technology startup world works, what it takes to get a product like that to market, how a tech startup is launched and eventually sold, this is the conversation for you. And even if you're not personally interested in technology startups, the human story of this kind of venture and the kind of person you have to be to stick with it, it's captivating. You'll hear Mark went through a number of failures before the big successes, and that is generally par for the course for people that are in this world. The location for this episode is a bit of a departure. Normally, The Distiller is recorded in and around Cincinnati, where I live. Mark lives in San Diego, and I've been trying to find a time and a place to meet with him for the better half of a year. We were finally able to meet up at a family event in Lago Vista, Texas, about an hour outside of Austin, right on the shores of Lake Travis. We sat down about 100 yards from the shore of the lake one Saturday morning in early August. If you listen close, you can probably hear the birds in the trees, the kids playing on the lawn. Maybe the best setting ever for a podcast. And Mark's sister, who is also my partner Sarah Rose's mother, Marie, even surprised us with a couple of cocktails while we talked. I think my favorite part of the conversation, aside from the cocktails, was hearing Mark talk about the real specifics of what goes on in this fabled world of mystical VC startups. I asked him at one point about the potential for regret and anxiety in these huge decisions, like mortgaging his house at one point to keep an idea afloat. Mark's answer is illustrative of the kind of person he is: driven, generous, humble, and dogged in pursuit of an idea in which he believes. And Mark is putting all those skills to work today on behalf of prisoners and recently released prisoners, helping people get their lives back together. I only wish we'd had more time to talk about that aspect of what he's involved with, but you never know. There will be future episodes. So in the meantime, settle in, put on your Shark Tank t-shirt and hat, walk with us into VC and startup world, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Mark BOWLES. Here it is on The Distiller. So first of all, thank you for meeting me out here on this beautiful, hot Texas day.
You're welcome.
This is the first time we've done one of these outside, I think, but this is the perfect setting to do it.
All right, I'm honored.
Well, tell me, let's start off a little bit, because I know a lot of things that you do, and I know some of the things that you have done, but I want to hear you tell me, if somebody just asked you right now, what do you do for a living, or what, however you want to say it, what your title is, or just what are you doing these days?
You know, it's a really hard question to answer, and that's the answer I give when people ask me, because I'm doing so much. Well, first, nobody pays me to do anything now, right? So
that's the unfortunate reality of success.
I'm doing a bunch of volunteer stuff. I'm doing a lot of investing. The only thing I really think that I know much about that's worth sharing with other people is how do you start a business, particularly venture-backed stuff in tech. It's the thing I've been doing for 30 years, and I got reasonably good at it, I think. And so I sort of focus on that as my lever, and I use that to volunteer. I do a lot of speaking to guest lecturing to college students, MBAs and undergrads. I do a lot of speaking at events about innovation, entrepreneurship, raising money, building teams, market research, those kind of topics. And I do a lot of that mentoring young companies, some that I invest in, some that I don't. So I do a lot of angel investing. I'm probably invested in a dozen startups. It's all local for me, which is San Diego.
Yep.
I don't do it really with the idea that I'm going to make a whole lot of money, because it's a hard game to actually make money in.
Yeah.
But I do it to support the local community, and again, it's reflexive for me. It's the thing that I know, and like everybody else, I like to do the stuff I'm good at, or think I am, and so that's my lever. I do a lot of stuff even in prisons, teaching entrepreneurship to prisoners through a program called Defy Ventures, and then another one that I've put together with a friend of mine, and then working with guys that get out, how do they build their business and that sort of thing. I'm helping my son with his company. He's running a startup, so it really is sort of all about that thing. And as long as people will still listen to me and take my advice, I'll keep talking. I'm shocked sometimes that people are interested in what I have to say, but as long as they'll listen, I'll keep talking.
Is the majority of what you do in technology, or is it at this point your experience is so broadly applicable that you're consulting in new business startups and venture-based stuff regardless of the area?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I was all tech. I was microprocessors and semiconductors and chips and wireless chips, and that got to be a hard startup game. So what I realized along the way about maybe 10 years ago, a couple of companies ago, was that what I'm really good at is not the technology part, but it's building companies, building teams, raising money, expressing a business plan, and being able to communicate that story in a compelling way to investors. I got pretty good at separating investors from their money along the way, and so. Yeah, I then diversified. EcoATM was a company I started that was sort of in the environmental space, still tech, but with trying to recycle phones and inspire that, but in the masses. But I've gotten a lot into biotechnology and genomics in the last 4 or 5 years, because that's it's sort of half of San Diego's innovation economy is, $2 billion in venture capital invested there last year, and a little over $1 billion of it was for that stuff. So I don't claim to be an expert in the technology, but I sit on a board of a research institute that is in that technology, and I'm maybe slightly more than a layman, but not much more than that. And I've invested in several genomic companies, and so I'm getting more familiar with that space. But really, it's not about the technology or the science for me. It's my value to these efforts is more just how do you run a disciplined business and raise money and express that story and so forth.
Yeah, I think that distinction is important. I mean, the conversations that I have with people, I've been involved in some entrepreneurial ventures, not nearly to the degree that you have, but even just drawing that distinction for people that haven't been involved in that world, that those are separate disciplines, that they require separate expertise, and that knowledge in one doesn't in any way equate to success in the other. Is a very important sort of early stage learning for most of the people that have a good idea and maybe want to think about how that would become a business.
It is amazing how different those worlds are, and we all live in the same community, but when people go to work at a tech company versus a genomics or healthcare or biotech, it is they're different communities, and they really almost don't mix at all, and they run things differently, and one community is 10, 15 years behind another community on certain things, and the other's 10, 15 years behind the other one. And the capital is totally different. The investors, their mindset, the wavelength, the words per minute that they speak, totally different. Their cycles are just, massively different. And I didn't learn that till 4 or 5 years ago. I'm like, who are these people? And but I'm slowly starting to get plugged into that community too, and it's a different world, but very interesting. Lots of stuff happening there.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because one of the things that I'm most interested in, I know some of your story, I know a bit of the EcoATM story, not much of it, but I'm interested to know how you even got into this world. So at what age did you start to dabble in technology at all, and how did that, both in terms of your own interest and in terms of your education and eventually work, result in you getting into entrepreneurial ventures and inventive sorts of ventures?
Yeah, so it didn't start with tech for me. It actually started at a Greasy Spoon restaurant in Crystal Beach, Texas.
We're being served a cocktail.
There
Thank
we
you,
go.
Marie.
Genius. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
So the
Cheers.
Ching Ching, yeah.
All right.
Aperol Spritz.
Perfect.
So it actually started when I was really young. My parents were divorced when I was 4, and then mother remarried when I was about 6, and we bought a little restaurant, 6 bar stools and 2 booths in Crystal Beach, Texas, population 600, and it was sort of Cajun fried seafood, hamburger place. But we had a 2-bedroom house behind it on stilts. This is a barrier island right on the border of Louisiana and Texas and the Gulf Coast. And we had 5 kids in 1 bedroom and the parents in the other. And we were the staff in the restaurant. And so got off the bus after school and 3 and went to work and bussed tables and, washed dishes and peeled shrimp and then grew into that business. It was the way we ate. And so I got to see at an early age how to sort of run a business and $1 in, $1 out, and how that whole cycle works. And once you've seen that system, even though it's a really small system business, $1 in, $1 out, it was really hard from that point. Everywhere I worked after that, I was like, well, it was harder for me to be a cog in the wheel than
how does the business work?
How does the business work? Right. Yeah, I'm not going to be a sales guy or whatever. So I always thought about the whole business. And so after I worked my way through college and graduated in '87, I got a few job offers, and one of them was in California, in Silicon Valley. And I knew kind of what that place was. And
what'd you study in college?
I got a degree. It's sort of it's from the engineering department. It's an engineering degree, but it was called industrial distribution. And it actually was a really genius thing. It was easier than an engineering degree because I didn't have to take the last year of the hardcore stuff, but instead took business classes. And turns out, 75% or something of the entire GDP goes to industrial distribution with pipe, valve, and fitting, electrical, plumbing, lumber, and these were not sophisticated, well-run businesses for the most part. And this degree was to bring some sophistication to those things, including semiconductors. Okay. And so I got hired, and I went to work for a big distributor in Silicon Valley selling chips. And and then the other really formative part was when I got to Silicon Valley. I was 6, 7, 8 years later before I started my first startup, but I worked for big companies and I did product marketing. But I ended up in sales, and I got this PhD in innovation in Silicon Valley by I worked for Motorola Semiconductor, and this company made everything, and if you were building anything, you needed some of their product. And so I had this business card that was like a golden ticket. I could walk into any company, big, small, startup, whatever, and I'm from Motorola, and come back, take me in the back, and those engineers show me everything they're doing and tell me their business plan and the whole
what a
thing.
Great education.
It was this like magic card that I could just walk in anywhere, and they would just educate. So I got this amazing, and I would call on 2 or 3 customers a day, sometimes, and so you get this exposure to big companies medium-sized companies, small companies, but all trying to innovate on this crazy stuff to use your product. And so, and then you start to see the pattern recognition of, the startup guys had a faster words per minute, and they were more passionate, and they were, worked longer hours and harder, and they were really loving what they did. And they also had a lottery ticket, right? If their stock came in,
Right.
And the big companies were slower and kind of there to, people to collect a check, and they weren't as excited and so forth. So I'm like, I want to do that.
The exciting thing.
Yeah, I want to do the exciting thing. I don't want to do the big company thing anymore. And so I got too big for my britches. In mid-'90s, I started my first startup, and it was what I knew. It was semiconductors, because I'd been doing that. So I started a microprocessor company. And
Manufacturing? Selling?
Well,
reselling?
No. In that business, nobody manufactures. You outsource it, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's $5 billion to build the fab that would fabricate the stuff. So you just outsource it. But actually, before that, I got involved with. There was a short time in the mid-'90s when you could clone a Apple Macintosh. Steve Jobs had left, and he was.
I remember those. Yeah, the Mac clones were a big.
Yeah, and it was a big deal, and I was right in the middle of that, because I was actually, my last job at Motorola was the PowerPC, which was the microprocessor. I was the VP of market development. So my job was to go and evangelize PowerPC to people. Well, the guys that needed it were Mac clones, because that's what Apple was using. So they gave away 4 licenses, and I ended up being involved in each one of those and helping them raise. I want you to buy my product. If you can't get venture funding, then you're not going to be able to do that. So I helped them raise money, and so I got into the money thing, and I got friends and family and other people to invest, several millions of dollars into a few of those, and then. So I got a taste for it then, but I still kept my day job at Motorola, and then I decided to go do one myself.
Okay.
And that one ended up being a $80 million 6-year smoking hole in the ground at the end. But we actually did have a huge offer at one point. This was the meltdown in 2000.
Okay, right.
And
just the timing of the market.
The timing was, we actually had a really, not a written offer, but a verbal for $750 million to buy this thing we'd been working on forever.
Yeah.
And it worked. And it was, we said no. No, we're not gonna sell.
Why?
Just stupidity and blind hubris. I mean, we were just like.
So you think it
wasn't just me. I was young.
No, but it was a mistake.
It was a massive mistake.
Okay, all right.
Well, you do the math. We sold the assets of that company about 18 months later for $2 million, and we had $3 million in debt.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a lesson in timing and heartbreak and lots of other stuff. But yeah,
the reason, not to take us off track, but one of the reasons why I asked if that was a mistake is because I was literally having a conversation with somebody about exactly this issue. And one of the things that I think a lot of people who in various industries who are in startup ventures don't feel like they actually have the ability to say no to money that's not maybe going to be helpful to them.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe the market goes a different way. That's the right decision for you guys. It just, it sounds like the timing and different forces.
Yeah. I mean, even, with hindsight 2020 and all that, we were just dumb. I mean, it was a really terrible mistake. And we not good.
Just hubris. You guys thought you were worth more, and you were never going to get it.
No. We were really proud of this thing. We're just going to hold on to it, and we'll go public. And no tech company went public for the next 5 years or something after that. But it was terrible.
So talk about that for a second, because that's got to be devastating.
It is, and that's
it's easy to look back on now and kind of laugh, but I'm sure
it
was no 6 or 8 months where you were not laughing. It was no fun at
all. It's not just the money. It's, look, I just put 6 years of literally 80, 90-hour weeks into this thing and made it work. And we had 140 people that had jobs, and I had to go fire all these people, like wave after wave after wave, and couldn't raise money, it's devastating, not just for you, but for everybody around
Right,
you.
right.
And living through that's no fun. It's much more fun to build them up than it is to tear them down, and it's much more fun to exit with a positive thing for everybody. It's a harsh environment, the startup stuff. It really is. It's been glamorized in this rock star thing in the last 15 years or so, but it really is one of the most heartbreaking sort of careers you can embark on, because no matter how good you are, you're going to fail a bunch, and it's a really harsh environment. I see people go through it all the time because I mentor, hundreds of people, and it's really not a thing for most people to go do. It really is 5% of the population is cut out for that thing.
Yeah.
And there's lots of harsh jobs, right? Working in an emergency room, or driving an ambulance, or being a policeman or a soldier. I mean, there's lots of things that you can do that are harsh, but from an emotional standpoint, it's a roller coaster every day, the highest highs and lowest lows, and they may be 10 minutes, from each other, and it just is a whiplash thing, and it bucks most people off and sours you. And
what's the I guess two questions about that. Number one, like, what's the actual sort of like psychological impact of going through that over and over again, and what personality traits does it take to be able to stay in there and survive and not have that crush you when that's going to happen?
That's a great question. I like to attribute a little bit of it. I grew up in Southeast Texas, and oil country, and there really is kind of a boom bust mentality there. And if you look at the Farmer's Almanac of the population of that area, it's boomed and busted 10 times since they the oil was discovered in that Spindletop, and it's a mentality that if it's good, it's going to go bad soon, right? And so California's not like that where I live now. California's, everything's always been up and to the right. I mean, there's little cycles here and there, but it's just all growth and sunshine and, whatever. And there's not as much of that mentality there. And so I think I have a little bit, more of that boom and bust and I grew up, really pretty poor, and I didn't, I don't want to be, I don't want to be poor anymore. I didn't want to be poor, and so I try to avoid, although I've gone back to being, fairly poor a few times since then, but I don't like that, right? So,
but the other side of that is how to do it. Like it doesn't kill you. It doesn't compromise who you are at your core. You're like, I've been here and I dug my way out of it. I'll do it again. Right.
Yeah, I didn't start. I think if I started at not poor, it would be harder, right? So, anyway, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, you absolutely did. Well, so like you mentioned that like you've been through this cycle a number of times, and then eventually, what's the common thread between? And maybe you can mention a few other things that you were involved in. Where do you go from that? Like, what's the next thing that you start off in, and how do you gain the courage after that first big, huge hit, which is part of what we just talked about, to create the next thing?
Well, that company that was the 6-year, $80 million smoking hole in the ground, had to tear down a 140-person organization, and missed the big opportunity. In parallel with that, a few years earlier, about a year and a half earlier, I had helped start another one on the side, another semiconductor company. It was actually some guys that were working for me that said, we have this idea and, run it past you. That's a great idea. I can't do it because I'm running this other thing, but I'll help you fund it and get it funded, and I'll advise and whatever. And so that one, it was literally 6 people, founders, in 9 months, and we sold it for $110 million with very little cash in. And so in parallel with this huge smoking hole in the ground, I had this other success that probably left a little wind in my sail where but the truth is I was so tied up in this startup thing that I wouldn't have gone back to work for a big company. I was going to go start another one anyway, and it just was in my blood and still is, and I just couldn't go back to to work for a big company, and quite frankly, nobody would hire me. I'm a weird duck, really. I mean, I'm a terrible interviewer. I'm a jack of all, master of none, and people want to hire a master for these silos.
Sure, they want
build.
specialists,
and I'm not that guy. And so, I at some level, I was aware of that even then. I'm acutely aware of it now, but back then I was like, yeah, there's no job I could get that I want. I got to go make my own. I got to go do this thing, and it's. I really am not. And this kind of is another extended answer from the last question. I'm not really, I don't, my success at this thing is just really a numbers game, and I'm a barnacle. I just stick with stuff, and I have perseverance, and I go back and try. I'm not smarter than most people. I'm not more technical or more, but I work really hard and I stay with it like a barnacle. And that really turns out to be a lot of what separates success from failure in this particular startup game, because it is so harsh, like I said, and it bucks a lot of people off. And you just don't want to go do it again. And I don't know any better. I just, once I get strapped into the harness, I just pull against the leather until something happens, right?
Yeah. Do you think that's just true of life? I mean, so I've experienced in the entertainment industry, there's all these industries where there's these discussions of talent or intelligence or some X factor that's the differentiator between the people that make it and people that don't. And the older that I get, I actually think it has nothing to do with any of that. It's luck and hard work.
It's luck and hard work, exactly.
And
it sounds cliche, and when you say it, it doesn't really mean anything when people hear it. Like, oh yeah, luck and hard work. But it really is the thing. And I don't even know how to say those words in a way that doesn't sound cliche where people are interested. Because I find myself saying, and it sounds self-serving too, yeah, I work really hard. But it's the truth. That is the thing that separated me from way smarter people than me. That is and there's also a fine line too, because there's a really fine line between being a persevering, hardworking, stick-to-it entrepreneur and just a totally irresponsible jackass, right? Because
where you can't listen to all the factors that are saying no.
Yeah, and sometimes it is time to give up and go, and sometimes, there's a balance with, you've got other responsibilities. You get your family and your all that. So you got to balance those things, and it really becomes quite hard. And again, it's not for everybody, but yeah, luck and hard work.
Yeah, well, no, and it sounds like another piece of it that's worked for you is sort of diversification. And whether that's something you did intentionally or whether it's something that you learned to do or it just happened, was not putting all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, you got 1 6-year endeavor that you're putting everything into, but even at that time, you're playing another poker game on the side that might be the one that pays off.
Yeah.
Is that something you've done? Is that something that's been in your mind, and is it something that has been true of you throughout these ventures? Have you always sort of had your hand in a number of pies to wait to see which one of them is going to come out?
Not. I mean, I have been totally monogamous with whatever thing I was involved in. It could only be that for me, that's the only way to play the game is to be completely immersed in whatever you're doing.
Because otherwise it pulls
again,
focus.
I'm not smart enough to be really, really good at this and that. I got to just get not focused, and then I can be good at what I do, because you end up making that one thing finite, and you really understand everything about it, and you become an expert at it. But that takes all of my effort, and so. While I invested in this other thing and helped them raise money and answered a phone call every now and then, I wasn't doing that thing.
Okay.
And the reason that one was successful is because these guys were geniuses and picked the exact thing that this company Broadcom bought it, that they forecast, the train's going down this track and they're going to need this at mile whatever this particular technology we're building. We'll just build it and sit in the middle of the tracks, and it worked. 9 months later, they rolled up and said, "I'll take that for $110 million," right? And so that had nothing to do with my smarts or my contribution at all. I did help them raise the money, and I helped them, structure the company and how to build it. But I didn't. That was a lot of luck. Right?
Okay.
So all my execution powers were on this one monogamous.
You were focused,
and that's pretty much what I've done all along. Right now, I'm not doing any one big thing. I'm scattered all over the place for about the last 5 years. But the only way for me to play that game is to jump in all the way in and just dedicate every ounce of my energy to it. And I don't want to do that anymore, quite frankly. I mean, it's just too much. I don't have to, and I don't want to.
This is a younger person's game for the most part. What's the impact, the difference between that lifestyle and it's sexy. On the outside, it sounds like, yeah, man, you're in this thing. Yeah, you're working hard and you're putting everything into it. It could result in the big payoff. It could result in nothing. But at the end of the day, you're going home to a wife and 3 kids who maybe through a lot of that stuff are sort of, looking at the bankroll before it pays out. Like, what's the cost there? And I guess my specific question is, describe in those first lean years the decisions and the sacrifices on a human level.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was never so lean. I mean, when we were ever short on food, or we lived in nice neighborhoods and houses. But even then, there's a psychological I mean, I'm trying to
impact.
Yeah, I mean, I got 3 young kids, and they're all going to want to go to school, and whether I want to be in nice schools and nice neighborhoods, and be able to pay for college if they want to do that and so forth. So I didn't want to, and I also didn't want to be poor, right? That really, I've said that a few times, but that was sort of a baseline driver for me. Yeah, I don't know if that sounds good or bad, but
when you've been there.
Yeah, I really don't want to be poor.
Unless you've really been poor, you don't understand what that statement means.
And it wasn't I wanted to be rich. It was I didn't want to be poor, right? Yep. It was I didn't want to. There was a lot of lean years. I mean, there was a lot of time where we didn't do much other than eat and go to school and sort of hunker down. At one point this was in 2007. I had a second $80 million 6-year smoking hole in the ground that was right on the end of the other one. So it was a 12-year, $160 million. There's 200 other employees involved in all this stuff that. It all went up in smoke for them too. So I had 2 of those back to back, and in startups you don't get paid what you would be paid outside of that doing that job in a big company, for example.
You're not getting market rate salary.
Maybe half. Yeah. Maybe So I really wasn't making a lot of money, and for a long time, and I started this company EcoATM, and I believed in it. Market turned again in 2007, 2008, and I ended up at one point having to. I had pitched, 30 VCs at that point to get this thing funded, and not only was I getting, it's not a good idea. This is a bad idea, and you'll never get this funded. And these are friends of mine, VCs, that are like, Mark, let me tell you, be honest with you, you'll never get this funded, and it's a terrible idea, and you really should go do something else. And I'll look at that, but just don't do this, right? And I still believed in it, and I came back from a trip to Silicon Valley, and this VC I know I'd pitched 4 or 5, over a couple of days, and I came back, and my wife said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "Well, Wayne said it was a terrible idea and that I shouldn't do this, and I'll never get it funded." And so did the other guys. And by the way, we need to sell the house, and we need to pull the kids out of private school, and we need to sell their college funds because I got to keep I didn't have any funding, and we were trying to build the company and build a prototype, and so I have no income for 2 years at that point. Not even my small income, and then I'm also all the outgo. Right. And so that was an interesting conversation, but we ended up doing it. And
you come home and you say, not only are they not going to fund it, we're going to fund it. We're going to fund it by selling all of our assets.
So I shoved everything in at that point. And I'm 45 or something, and I got no bank account left, and my last little stuff.
Yeah, that's chips across the table.
I'm sliding it all in, and I got a house back. I got the kids back in private school. I got it all back, but they don't all work out that way, right? That's that fine line I was talking about between being persevering and being a jack. Because I was absolutely sure EcoATM would work, but I was also absolutely sure that the other two $60 million, $80 million smoking holes in the ground would work, and they didn't. Right, so I knew in quotation marks, but I didn't really know. But again, I probably crossed that line I talked about, but it worked out. So,
are you a guy? I think about that, and I think if I was that guy, number one, I'm not sure that I would have the perseverance to make that decision. But I do know that if I made that decision, I wouldn't have slept for 3 months. Like I would have laid in bed every single night with anxiety about that. Do you work that way, or are you sort of like, no, damn it, I made the decision. We're gonna see what happens.
I pretty much make decisions and don't look back. I think I'm lucky that way. I don't get tortured by stuff that I can't change anymore. I may remember it and try not to make that particular mistake again, but I don't really have that problem. I made it and I live with it. So,
right on.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about
I'll tell this. I did at the moment when they actually finally accepted the offer, and we rode the market down for a year and a half on this house, and I lost all the equity I'd built up for 15 years in California, which is substantial. I mean, it was a lot. And but it was all on paper in the house. Yeah. And the market in San Diego dropped 40%, 35%. And I rode that down, and I had to actually write a check to sell my house. Oh. So I lost, $700,000, $800,000 in equity I'd built up. So now I don't have a house. I don't have any of the equity. I can't get back on that train in California.
No.
I can't do it. So I was pretty much cooked at that point if it didn't work out. So anyway.
Wow. Well, talk a little bit about EcoATM, because I'm also interested in where's that idea come from? Was it... and I'm interested in this for EcoATM, but also just in terms of a person like yourself, an inventor, an entrepreneur. Did you wake up one day with this great idea? Was it an accumulation of thinking over a couple of months? Tell a little bit. I know what EcoATM is because I see it. People probably know what EcoATM is because if you shop at a Kroger or a Safeway or an Albertsons or a Food Lion, just about anywhere in the United States, it's right there next to the Red Box or the Coinstar machine, and it's the machine that recycles your cellular phone. You plug it in, there's a person on the other end. It's not an automated customer service. It actually connects you with a human being in a call center who runs some analytics.
It actually does. It would operate without a person. It uses cameras and machine vision and artificial intelligence, and it actually can value the phone by both the visual inspection and the electrical inspection. You're really looking to see if it'll power up and if the battery is okay, and if the screen is cracked or broken, if the glass is, and then if the actual LCD, and that information, and you can tell how scuffed up it is, and the scratch density. We can calculate all that stuff, but it has a human involved, not for evaluating the phone, but for avoiding any buying stolen phones. So we force every person. This is a decision we made really early on. You have to show your driver's license, and a camera looks at that. And then we have a camera looking at the person that presented the driver's license, and those two images appear on the screen. There's probably 25 people in San Diego right now sitting at a screen, and every transaction, there's a stream of them, and it comes through, and they're looking to see if the person matches, and then we get your thumbprint, and then we get the serial number on a phone, and we present all that data to all the law enforcement databases and so forth. But we have a human involved because it's hard to match the images. People's hair changes and they have glasses on. And so we have a human involved to make sure that it's, and we do a lot of rejections, by the way. And we are the best in the industry at avoiding stolen phones. Only about 1 in 1,500 that we collect. These are numbers from when I left. I'm not involved anymore. This is 5 years ago. But they still do it the same way. And it's, we're really best in the business at avoiding stolen phones, and so that's why the humans are involved.
Okay.
And yeah, interesting business model. So
Where did it come from?
So I was after my, second 6-year, $80 million smoking hole in the ground. I'm like, the semiconductor business is too hard. Just to know whether you win or lost it takes 6, 7. It was 6 years in. It's probably getting 8 or 9 now, or it would be if I had started one then. And I thought, what I'm good at is starting companies, building teams, raising money. It's not the technology. So why don't I go do something? And it freed me. I'm like, wow, I can do anything. I can go, So I like to, when I'm ideating for 6 months, a year, whatever it takes, I do that best with other entrepreneurs who are sort of in between companies. And you find those people in the community, and it's usually coffee shops, and you meet and you toss out ideas. And I read this and I read that. Here's a problem we could solve. And so I was working with a couple of guys, and we were working on, 5, 6, 7 different ideas in parallel, and beating them up and spending 3 or 4 hours every day at the coffee shop and doing research at home. And so one of the guys, actually, he had the problem statement. It's like, look, there's 1 billion smartphones shipped, or 1 billion phones shipped last year. This is 2008. And there's a survey. It actually came out in the summer of 2008. Nokia did 13 countries, 6,500 households. Only 1% of people had ever reported, recycling a phone. Like, wow, what's happening with the other 1 billion of these things? And what can we do about that? And then, I don't even know where to recycle, right? I had some vague notion of there's a box at the zoo you could donate, and there was the battered women's box at Verizon, but it's got to be a bigger scale than that to handle this problem. So now we had a problem statement, and what could be an interesting market. And then one day, so we were beating up other ideas, and we had a bunch of bad ideas. One was like Boy Scouts. Okay, the Girl Scouts do cookies. What if we made the Boy Scouts an environmental thing? They'll go collect, door to door. They'll collect people's phones, just knock and ask, and then they can sell them. And we met with the Boy Scout leadership and stuff. And long story short, there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to send little boys to strange people's houses. Yeah. And so we abandoned that. We had some other bad ideas. One day, one of the guys walks in and he says, "Hey, I saw this Coinstar machine what if we did that?" But his idea was a sort of, you fill out an envelope, put the phone in, it goes, we go pick them up, and then 30 days later we might send you a check.
Right, maybe not. Yeah.
And I thought, I don't think that will inspire people, right? And being a tech guy, and I had some background in another company in facial recognition, I thought, wow, what if we could automate this and pay cash on the spot? That would be enough incentive to inspire mass participation, right? And so I started thinking about that, and I started talking to some vision system experts on the algorithms, and then so that my contribution was automate it, and use machine vision to do that and pay immediately, right? Yeah. And the other guys didn't like that at all. Actually, in the beginning, they came to like it, obviously, but they didn't like. It's a terrible idea. But filed some patents and on those claims, and then. Went off to build and I liked the idea of, I had 6 or 7 other ideas, and they were actually, most of those were pretty strong. But the fact that it was an environmental thing, I wanted to do something in that space, the doing good while doing well thing. And it seemed like a symmetrical thing to do because of all the other technology I'd helped build and get out into the market. Let's do something to help clean that stuff up. And it's also much easier to build a company that has a mission that's so obviously noble. It's almost a cheat in a way in terms of hiring good people, because there's lots of other jobs. But in San Diego, you could be making bomb fuses or drones, or whatever. Yeah. How about making a machine that's like little Wally and is just going to go clean up the planet, right? Right. And that was it's easier to get really good people onto that noble mission, and it wasn't easy to get capital. That's another story. It took forever, but it was Yeah, it was a noble mission. It's a lot more fun that way when everybody feels inspired about what they're doing.
I want to ask you procedurally, because I think for people that aren't in this space, one of the things that stands a lot of times between people and a good idea and an execution is some people. I just was talking about this in one of the last episodes. People who have not been involved in the making of a thing don't understand what it actually takes to get something made.
Yeah.
You had an idea. You guys were talking around your problem statement. You come up with a couple of specific points of differentiation, facial recognition, automating the system, paying out right then. But then you have to actually go between then and filing for the patents is the development process of creating the patent and knowing how to make that technically feasible.
Yeah.
Do you hire that workout? Do you go out to a couple of guys and have them sign NDAs and then like you're contracting with some people to do the work to create the patent, or are you writing those yourself?
No, I have a patent, a friend of mine who's been writing my patents. I have 33, 35, something like that, patents filed, and maybe, I don't know, at this point, 15 or something issued.
Okay.
I haven't written a line of code since college, but I can still invent things, strangely enough. And I kind of know what the technology can do, so I can say, go do that. So we filed the patents. So I get other people to actually do the work, but we filed the patents before we ever built anything.
Okay.
And it turns out those patents, I mean, the original provisional patent that we did, that we turned into a bunch of other patents, we were spot on everything. I mean, it was luck more than anything else, but all of those original claims, we ended up expanding that into, another 28 or 30 patents or something. But it was, we did that, and then we went to fill in, what those claims that we had filed with actually building it and seeing what we were doing. And we learned stuff along the way and filed new claims.
Yep.
But it was, the original stuff is actually how the business and the technology ended up turning out working, basically. And
for people that don't know, a provisional patent is essentially a patent, a beginning patent that you file that explains the idea for the technology and the function and the execution, that eventually the assumption is you'll go back and expand that patent into specific
you have a year
technical
from
documents.
filing it, and it really is just a stake in the ground with the date, a placeholder that I have this idea.
And that's why you can patent it without actually having created
well,
a
it's
physical.
not that would expire. It would never be patent. It would just expire and go away.
Yeah.
But you have a year to take what's in that and file a real patent with those claims. And hopefully in a year you've learned a lot more to refine it so that your claims are a lot tighter and better, because you understand a little bit more in detail of what you're trying to do, which we did. And we did. But it was from that moment in August of 2008 where we filed that patent, had the general idea. It was 3 years later before we had an implementation of it that was automated. For the first 3 years, we stood next to, or had staff stand next to a machine, and they were the technology.
Right.
It looked like it would buy back a phone automatically, and it would pay you on the spot and all that. But the technology didn't work, or wasn't in there, or whatever. But it was the people were the technology, and so they would make sure that it was an iPhone, whatever, and not a banana or a rock or something, right? And so we just faked it until we make it. But it worked.
So fast forward, you develop this, you file your patents, you guys get through the technical disagreements and limitations. Somehow you go to Hawaii, you come back, you haven't raised the money, you put your house on the line. Describe the process at the moment at which you actually know that you've got a successful thing, and then whether it's the same moment or the next moment, the moment when you know that that thing that you have is actually going to be a successful business model.
So from the moment I sold that house, and I got the call, I was actually in my car down at La Jolla Shores looking at the waves, and I got the call that the house was accepted at that price, and finally was sold, and they all hit home. And I just started bawling my eyes out. I really was, I haven't cried that hard maybe ever. I was just like, man, I just lost everything. And now I'm sitting on this idea that and I hadn't even tested it yet, right? We had the patents filed, but we hadn't even built a box and put it out.
Yeah.
And that was a hard spot. And then about a month later, 2 months later maybe, we had a prototype box built. It really was just plywood box painted with a touchscreen bolted on the front that you would select, your phone, Apple, iPhone, does it power up, does the screen broken, whatever, and it would yield a price, but it was an empty box, right? So we had to have a person. We loaded that up in my truck, and the first people that would allow us to test it was Nebraska Furniture Mart in Omaha. And so we loaded it up and drove at 60 miles an hour because it wouldn't go any faster than that with this giant box in the back. And we put it in Nebraska Furniture Mart. And
one box, one store.
One box, one store. And we stood next to it. And how many people? So we weren't measuring technology, right? Didn't have any technology. But what it was pretty accurately measuring is how many people walking through a retail space.
Right.
Nobody has their phones, right? Would see a box that looked like would automatically buy back your phones. How many of those would spin on their heel, go to the parking lot, get in their car, drive home, get their phones, and come back and attempt to sell them, right? And so we, it was a little slow the first day, and then it kind of picked up the second day. And then within a week, we had a perpetual 30-minute waiting line. Within 2 weeks, it got to about 45 minutes, and it never got longer than that because people would just walk around the store and come back. But we had just lines of people, and then the next week, the news crews started showing up. People started coming to like, what is this thing? By the way, lines are the best advertising ever. People are standing in line, everybody else is like, wow, I got to get some of that, whatever it is, man. So anyway, people would show up at the door at 9, place opened up, and they'd be banging on the door, and the manager came back the first day it happened, he opened it up, and they all went back to our machine. It's like,
that's incredible.
So we did a month trial. We collected 2,300 phones, and we couldn't have really gotten more volume through the machine, really. I mean, it was just like max the whole time. And I knew it would work. So to answer your question, I knew it would work at that point. Like, wow, the mousetrap catches mice like crazy. At least in Nebraska, and it probably works, other places too. So this works, but it was a year and a half from that point, and we built 20 more machines just like that. Same results everywhere we put them. And the VCs would come out and see that and go, man, I don't think this is going to work. They had this bias against hardware, big iron hardware, and retail and consumer. It's just too many moving parts, and all the competitors were starting websites. Just send in your phone. Gazelle, maybe you saw some of their ads. Gazelle.
Yeah, I think so.
You just price it on the web and then send it in a box, and then they send you a check. Well, it wasn't immediate, and I didn't think that was a good system. But all the funding was going that way, and they're like, dude, use the internet and mail. Don't build a bunch of CapEx and these really expensive machines. You got to service me. You got to pick up the phones. You got to put cash in. It's a nightmare. Why would you do that? And so they couldn't get over that bias. Just a little bit of brag. EcoATM bought the assets of Gazelle, who was the big one, just about 2 years ago, because that model ultimately didn't work. And that was my pitch. It's not going to work. Yeah. You can't keep that much because you have to advertise nationally all the time, or the spigot dries up. People don't just send them in, right?
Right.
It turns out that was true, and so we bought their assets, and so EcoATM's still out there today collecting. They're probably at 20 million phones at this point, maybe over, and they're 250 million in revenue, maybe more, and they also have paid back probably close to $1 billion to consumers for stuff, 80% of it would have ended up in the dump and as toxic waste. And so it's this little machine, sits in retail and converts toxic waste into money for consumers that gets spent back in the store to buy other stuff. And it's really noble from all angles. And it created, at last count, I think it's 2,500 man years of jobs for people, and it's still going. Wow. It's cleaned up those 20 million phones. And it's still going. And it created, 10 or 12 millionaires that were in the company, and a whole bunch of other. See these kids that we hired that have bought houses now. Yeah. Bought them right out of college after their first job, and so. Yeah, it feels like a good legacy. I don't even know if I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a solid win. I mean, there's so many things that I think about that you had to figure out along the way. You had to figure out, can we make enough money off what we're doing with these phones to actually like fund our business model.
Right.
What are you going to do with all this stuff? Like,
Yeah.
can you take all the raw materials and turn them around so that the intent of the environmental benefit actually turns into an environmental benefit, and you don't just end up with warehouses full of phones that you can't offload? All these things that I would imagine you guys just
it
years
wasn't
figuring out.
The technology wasn't trivial either. I mean, it's not quite like the complexity of building a car, but it's probably not terribly far off of that. I mean, it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of technology, a lot of software, a lot of robotics, a lot of constantly changing software on the phones, the OSs, and how you read those over USB. And so it wasn't a trivial exercise technology-wise. And then operations-wise, imagine having to put kiosks scattered all 42
and
states.
Service and maintain them.
And service and put cash in those and
Right.
pick up the phones and get those back and then sell them to the buyers. And so, it was a lot of, in fact, I'm a pretty good CEO. I've done that, a few times, but I knew this was over my head. And so after I ran this for a year and a half, I finally coaxed a good friend of mine who's a way better CEO, and he loves tedious detail, endless minutia of spreadsheets of operational stuff. Just I can rise to that occasion for a little while, but it's not the strength of my game, and I go nuts.
Yeah.
And so, we had to do that part right, because it was a lot of small transactions, a lot of stuff, business. And I knew I was probably not going to, maybe not fail, but I wouldn't be as successful as somebody who just digs it and is good at it.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine, Tom Tully, I brought him in. He's a tough guy. Everybody that had worked for him before, and I had worked for him before, they're like, you worked for that guy and you hired him again as your boss? Like, but he is a real, badass, operation, the kind of stuff we needed to do. And he really, so I hired my boss because he was going to end up making the investors more money than I would make, and myself and all the employees. Right. And I went off and continued to do all the stuff I was doing, but I didn't, I would have not done as well. So, that maturity came with having, I wouldn't have done that earlier in my career, but at this point it was not about being king. It was about, pulling it off. And I also, I knew that as we got more and more VC money in, that they would probably want to replace me. So I was like, all right, I'll replace myself before you replace, because I'll get my guy in.
Yep.
And it turned out to be a really good move. He was a huge asset to the company, and we ended up selling it for $350 million to the guys Coinstar and Redbox, and I would have probably gotten half of that or less if I had done it myself. So
broad strokes, because I'm interested in this as well, and I don't want to ask you, no confidential details, nothing that you're not comfortable sharing, but like, what's the process of selling a startup for $350 million? Like, hit the high points. Like, somebody comes in and they're interested in it, or you're going out and you're courting potential sales, and how long did it take to actually make that sale happen? And what kind of, anxiety? Yeah, so
again, this was stuff I learned along the way, but and I actually give a pitch on this sometimes when I'm speaking, but you have to engineer your exit, and you got to do that from the very beginning of the company. And that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, because here's the truth. If anybody asks you what your plan is to exit, your answer to almost every audience should be, we're not thinking about exits. We're just building a business. That's going to be sad. But in the back of your, you should be engineering. If you're not paying attention, who's going to be paying attention to it?
Right.
And so I learned that along the way. And at the coffee table in the coffee shop when we were farming, I started immediately making a list. Who would get, if we pull this off and it works, who would give a damn, right? Yeah. And how, and what are their trading multiples, and what do they get? How would they value this? And because you should have some vision of that before you start, right? Because if you're going to throw a party and there's no happy ending, then you shouldn't start, right? Go do something else. And so that looked good in the beginning. And one of the people on that list was, who's the biggest public self-serve kiosk company in it's Coinstar. And so I actually hunted down, he says stalked, but the founder of that company, Jens Molbach, he knows everything I need to know, or a lot of it, right? And I found a guy on LinkedIn who kind of knew me that knew him, and he gave me an introduction. He gave me like a minute and a half on the phone the first time I called him, and he's like, And then I waited a week, and he gave me 3 minutes, and then I finally wore him down, and he said, look, I'm going to be in Seattle on Thursday. I wasn't going to be there. Mind if I drop by and see you? No, I got a busy day. I might have some time at the end of the day, but I don't think so, blah, blah, blah. So I just showed up at his lobby and sat there, and he walked past me a bunch of times, and then finally, all right, come in here. I got 15 minutes. 3 hours later, I left.
How early is this in the process? Do you already have a successful business at this point?
This was 6 months after the patent. We hadn't built a box.
Okay.
We had,
I love that.
3 people not collecting a check that we're working on.
Cool. Okay, go ahead.
And so anyway, I wore him down and eventually got him as an investor, as a board member, and then he wasn't involved he had sold Coinstar and hadn't been involved in 5 or 6, 7 years. But he still knew the company and so Coinstar actually ran this competition. They ran out of ideas on what other kiosk ideas, and they've been trying to do stuff internally for 10 years. Couldn't think up anything, so they ran a contest. So everybody else got ideas, right? So I applied and I won the thing, and I won I think it was a $20,000 check or something, and so that's how I got on their radar. Okay. That was my plan from the beginning. Is anybody that's going to buy you, get on their radar early, because these big companies have slow heartbeats, and there's 15 inboxes between the guy and the people that make that decision, and they need to watch the movie for 6 months, a year, or whatever. So it's better to have someone buy you than you to sell the company, if that makes sense. You don't want to go sell a company. You want people to come in and make offers, and you say yes or no, and get multiple, and you bring them to a crescendo at the same time. You play one off the other. And so that's what we did, and we built that. Then after I won the contest, then they were one of our first investors as well. And then they got on the board, and then they invested some more, and then so they watched it, and they tried to get us involved. Hey, we'll run the ops for you, or we'll have our people service the kiosk. And we just said, no, we're not going to become dependent on you, because then I'm not going to get acquired. And I didn't want to, sorry for the metaphor, but if you get the stink of one strategic buyer like that on you too much, the other ones go away and they'll never look at you. And so we had to sort of keep them close, but not too close. And so I think we managed that perfectly, and then what finally triggered the acquisition was that we had raised about $40 million at that point, and we went out and raised what's called mezzanine debt, another $40 million of debt that's pretty cheap, that would allow us enough room to go public.
Okay.
And once we had that in the bank, and they were trying to stop us from taking that and whatever, once we had it in the bank, we had a clear shot to go in public, and they couldn't afford us if we got out.
Right.
And so it triggered. Then all of a sudden, okay, well, all right, how much you want, right? And so we never spent the 40.
In their hand.
We never spent the 40, but we did. It was, I don't know, 3 or 4 months later we closed the. Like I said, I would have caved at 200 and taken it, but this friend of mine, Tom Tully, he's amazing. He just held on, and got 350 out of him. So anyway. Yeah.
So. We got just a little bit of time left. I'm interested. This is fantastic, and thank you for sharing all this. And I'm interested to know how we talk about work. I say that the podcast is about how you find meaningful work, how you find meaning in the work that you do. I know from our conversations and what you said at the beginning that you have transitioned now into a lot of work that is heavy on meaning. You're taking the time and the ability that you have to now invest back into people, both in the worlds that you've come from, in incarcerated populations and people that are just out of prison, and helping those people. What does the word work mean to you? Because you don't need to work for money now.
Right.
Nobody's paying you for the work that you do. So when you think about what does that work mean to you as you look forward to what you're doing now and sort of the next phase of your working life?
That's a really good question, really interesting. It's provoking a lot of thoughts that I haven't thought about it that way. I guess a lot of what I've been doing is more reflexive, and you're making me think about it. But I think being an entrepreneur is, again, this sounds self-serving, but I think it is a noble thing. I think that pursuit of building product. I mean, not all entrepreneurs are doing stuff that's noble, but I think most of them are. And just creating jobs, I mean, is a big deal. If you're thinking of products or services to make the world a better place that people need and want, and you are, you can go make that happen, and it creates jobs, and it creates wealth, and it creates, I think EcoATM's case, the inventory I gave of the stuff that it does, that to me that's fun stuff. And, again, I talked about all these people that made money or building houses and gone on to start other companies. This whole diaspora of people from EcoATM, they're doing amazing stuff. And I feel like I was part of that, was part of that. And so it's not, I hate the term giving back, because I don't think I took anything from anybody. I was doing my thing, and I think most of it was, but I think there's, and look, doctors are noble, and soldiers and firemen, and there's lots of noble things to do, right? Sure. I'm not trying to beat my chest that way, but I think that it is a noble pursuit to go do that. And since I don't have it in me to be a monogamous 80-hour week thing, what I can do is take what I know and help other people. And there's some ego in it too, because people listen to me and they think, wow, it's great, this stuff you're telling me.
They're going to take action on what you say.
Yeah, and so that's fun for anybody. And so and as long as I feel like that is is benefiting the people I'm talking to, and I'm not giving too much bad advice, and I like to see the reaction. I like to see people go on and be successful or more successful and than they would ever, build a better product or whatever. And so all that's pretty fun for me. And San Diego's a small enough town where I can kind of know almost everybody, and I'm really involved in the entrepreneur community there, and and it's fun. I mean, and I think it's helping people. It's not hurting anybody, I hope. I give some bad advice sometimes, but I try to avoid that. But anyway, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but it's not really work to me. I don't go, I got to go pull on the overalls and go to work today. But I think I'm doing some good stuff, Anyway.
It sounds like it. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been super informative for me, and your candor and your honesty about the process, I hope, will be informative for other people. I really appreciate the time, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for everybody wants to talk about my stuff. I'll talk about it.
Right on. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks.
This episode of The Distiller was recorded live in Lago Vista, Texas, just off the shores of Lake Travis, about an hour north of Austin. I want to again thank Mark Bowles for telling us a little bit about his story. It is inspiring to hear how these mythical tales of startup success actually happen. And I hope that in hearing Mark's tale, you're both clearer on the actual process it takes to get a product like EcoATM to market, and inspired to pursue whatever it is you've been working on. These days, Mark's got his fingers in a number of pies. He's putting together a TV pilot that you may very well see on a screen near you in upcoming months. He's very active in the San Diego tech startup scene, both as an investor and an advisor, and he's continuing to work on behalf of prisoners and recently released prisoners to connect them with resources and education to help them realize their dreams. It's really good work. You can learn more about what Mark's doing, including some links to work he's been a part of recently, at our website. That is at thedistillerpodcast.com. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson, with co-production and booking from Terry Heist. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts. Please do click that subscribe button. That will make sure that you're notified when new episodes are released. It's the beauty of podcasts. And if you like what we're doing, please do spread the word. You can follow and share our posts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we would love it if you would rate and review The Distiller wherever you listen, whether that's Google Play, iTunes. Ratings and reviews mean a ton to a show like ours, and it's the easiest way that we sort of expand our reach and make other people aware of what we're doing. So thank you for that. Remember, you can listen and download every episode of The Distiller, and you can find information. That includes links, photos of the guests, a map of all our show locations, maybe with the exception of this one, and get in touch with us all at thedistillerpodcast.com. You can also shoot us an email, mail@thedistillerpodcast.com, and you can contact us on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook. We want to know who you think should be on The Distiller to talk about their search for meaningful work, where you think we should record the show. So please drop us a line, whether it's by email, on the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We do always love to hear from you. So until next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.